You are traveling to another train of thought, one not from this century and challenging the status quo. You are now entering the paradigm shift. Well, good morning. This morning is the 16th of October 2017, and it is a little bit early. It's a little bit before 9. I started off 5 minutes early so that it would make it easier for me to make the turnaround to producing the Wasatch Report at 10 a.m. Eastern, and she will go on at 10 a.m. So that's why this show kicked off 5 minutes earlier than normal. There's just so many things that get turned around and gets turned on and ready for the next show. It just can't happen without starting a few minutes early. So we're going to kick off here with a couple things. We're going to go right back to Brutus. Brutus 1, talking about the writings of Robert Yates, a man that was a lifelong politician. And I want to discuss that a little bit right now because the other day there was a conversation going on on Facebook about us needing term limits because the founders never envisioned having lifelong career politicians. Well, that's not entirely true. If you looked at when I read the biography of Yates, he was a career politician. He was a lifelong politician. He started out and was in the Philadelphia Convention. He and John Lansing left the Philadelphia Convention at the end of it and went back and told Governor Clinton that they should oppose the Constitution because it was going to be a consolidated government. And he was on the New York State Supreme Court, was the Chief Justice. He spent his entire career in government. And he's not the only one. Other examples, I mean, there's just so many. I mean, you have Jefferson. He spent his entire career in politics. He was a farmer, but he spent most of his time. He was president. He was he was the writer of the Declaration of Independence and was at that convention. He was involved in the state government in Virginia. These men weren't, and then you had Patrick Henry, who was governor of Virginia many times, was in their house. He was instrumental in helping write their original Constitution in May of 1776, in their Declaration of Independence, because they declared independence before the rest of the colonies did. These men were, in many cases, career politicians. They were lawyers. They were farmers. They were the problem today is not that they're career politicians. The problem is that we have narcissists, we have power-hungry, greedy people that are in government. And this system has created a ability for these people to become massively rich. And if you don't believe they are, just look at their financials that they release, at the millions of dollars they are. A lot of these people went there, upper middle class maybe. They're not upper middle class any longer. Most of these guys, once they've been there for a while, are massively rich. They're millionaires. They have ways to funnel money towards themselves, and for the most part, people around this union just don't seem to care that they make themselves rich at our expense. Through whether it's their campaign funds that they get to take home with them when they're done. It doesn't matter how it is they do it. But the problem is that today we don't have men that like a Henry that said the primary language of the people is liberty. They today look at government as a way to make themselves rich, give themselves power, make themselves our masters. And that's what they are. We are now. We were talking about this last night, Daniel and I brought this up because, and it's going to be common. You're going to hear me say it a lot because we're tax slaves. That's why they have no problem calling us taxpayers, disparagingly, because we are just tax slaves. We are just, well, you are your social security number. You are a resource. That's why they have no problem with euthanasia. That's why some states are even encouraging it, like Oregon out west. Because once you've outlived your usefulness, once you're no longer providing for the enrichment of our masters, you're no longer necessary. So the problem, again, is not having people that are career politicians. It is the person. It is the heart of that person. That is where the problem lies. And it's, quite honestly, after the whole incident out in Las Vegas, there was a immediate rush to start calling for gun control. And they said, we need to pass more laws. Well, we have hundreds of laws concerning firearms across state laws and federal laws. And again, the federal laws, every last one of them, are unconstitutional. And that's not because we have a Second Amendment right. That's because the framers added the Bill of Rights as a further restriction on the general government's authority over these things. It wasn't listing rights. So you don't have a Second Amendment right. You have a natural right. So don't get me wrong. You have a natural right. But to say the government gives you a Second Amendment right is to give them the power to take that Second Amendment right. So every firearm law is unconstitutional because the framers said that in the preamble to the Bill of Rights, that they were making sure that the general government knew that where their boundaries were, and they had no authority over these things. They didn't have authority over religion, speech, firearms, searches and seizures. They restricted them. So every firearm law on the federal books every single one of them are unconstitutional. So stop saying you have a Second Amendment right, please. You have a natural right given by your creator, as Jefferson said in the Declaration. You have a natural right. Government isn't giving you a right. That is a total restriction on the general government. So, but they had an immediate knee-jerk reaction to need more firearms laws. Well, the fact of the matter is, do we need just one more law against murder? Would that change this guy? Would that stop this man? If we just passed one more law against murder, that would have never happened. It would have been all over. If that's all it takes is passing one more law, one more firearms law, one more murder law, does it really? I mean, really, there are already laws against it. So one more law is not going to change anything. The fact of the matter is, the intent is to disarm the populace. Once we're disarmed, we are truly subjects. We have no means to stop them from doing anything they wish. They already have created a system where the majority of people are perfectly fine with our socialism that we have. The vast majority of people today are perfectly happy being subjects. Most of them are perfectly happy not being a citizen anymore. They are just looking for what government can give them. So the problem again is not having career politicians, and I didn't really intend to go into this, but the problem is that we have politicians that are only out for themselves. They aren't there as Henry, Jefferson, Madison, and so many others were. They were career politicians, but their primary focus was on the people's liberty. And so let's get into Brutus. And again, that is what Brutus is talking about, what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to read a sentence, and then we're going to skip a whole section because he starts out a thought, and then he goes into something completely different, and then he comes back to that thought. And so I'm going to read the first sentence, and then we'll come back to, we'll skip through it a bit, and we'll come back to the section that intervenes, talking about the judicial system that was being set up, because he didn't have very nice words to say about that, but he also really went off on this first part. It may be shown here that the power in the federal legislative to raise and support armies at pleasure, as well as in peace as in war, and their control over the militia tend not only to consolidation of the government, but the destruction of liberty. And again, as I was just saying before, a lot of these men back then were career politicians, but their primary focus was defending the people's liberty. Today, can you say that about just about any of our politicians? Do any of them really care about your liberty? Can anyone out there even name 5 of them? There may be 1, there may be 2. Can you name 5 that their primary goal is to defend our liberty? My 2 may be Rand Paul. Sometimes, when it's convenient, he will. And Jason Amash, and sometimes when it's convenient, he will. Outside of that, I can't think of hardly any others. Most of them have no difficulty using government to advance what they think we should be doing or what is good for us. And that's the problem, again, sorry about that, I hit my mic. That's one of the problems I have with the Libertarian Party. With Johnson, this last election, when they had Johnson, and I can't even remember his running mate's name now, it didn't really matter. They were both awful. They both had no issue using government to force what they thought was we should be doing just as much as the Republicans do and the Democrats do. They had their agenda. So as far as gay marriage, Johnson had no issue using government to force gay marriage on all the states and on the populace. Just as what we're going to discuss here with the standing armies, the Republicans love the standing army. It's a great way for them to spend money and make their buddies rich in the military-industrial complex. I'm not quite sure. That whole phrase came from Eisenhower, who was a general, and he warned strongly against the military-industrial complex. But today we have a standing army. So let's just go down. I'm going to skip a big section about the judicial, and we're going to go down to and discuss the standing armies that Robert Yates was discussing. So here he goes. In despotic governments. Notice that word. I mean, he's very much. What does he think about governments that have standing armies? In despotic governments, it's the quickest way to despotism. As well as in all the monarchies of Europe, standing armies are kept to execute the commands of the prince or the magistrate. And the magistrate, I believe, there would be. I'm not sure if he's talking about actual magistrates, judges, or if he's talking about the legislative, or if he's talking about the executive. I'm not entirely positive on that one, so I'm not going to comment further on the magistrate part of it. But he says that the standing armies will be used by the magistrate to enforce the laws. Okay. Magistrate and are employed for this purpose when occasion requires, but they have always proved the destruction of liberty. Have we become more free by having standing armies, or have we become less free? I contend that we've become less free. We have less liberty because we have those in government that today would, and I've seen them post on it, that would love to see mandatory military service. And there's guys in the military. I've heard this from guys in the military. I said, and I've always immediately responded to that, because the second the military is calling for mandatory service, is people in the military, we're really moving towards despotism, being despotic. And Suzanne, I know you're there. I saw you pull in earlier, but I was on a roll. I didn't stop. And obviously you wanted to jump in on this because you unmuted. So good morning, Suzanne Sherman. Suzanne Sherman is out visiting family in California, and she'll be on later and discussing some of the things that's going on out in California. And go ahead, Suzanne. What did you want to add on that subject about the standing armies and being despotic?
Well, good morning. And yeah, thanks for letting me join in with you today. As you know, we've both been a little bit backed up with hunting season, family obligations. So thanks for letting us combine our shows and our efforts today. I think we do make a good team. When you talked about the standing armies, I like to reference the article in the 10th Amendment Center that Carl Jones and I published together, or wrote together, that was published in the 10th Amendment Center. And he had quoted St. George Tucker when they were discussing the Constitution and the standing armies and their concern. He said that the context of the right to bear arms and its role in preventing standing armies was crucial, because he said, and I'm going to quote him here, "Wherever standing armies are kept up, and when the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction." So even back then, they feared a standing army in times of peace. Well, then we say now, well, obviously we're never in time of peace, so there's continuous justification for the existence of a standing army. But are we more free, Jeff? I got in a lot of trouble. I had a lot of my veteran friends unfriend me, block me, when we had that whole discussion about this issue with regards to the national anthem and the pledge to the holy cloth. And I said, what freedoms of mine have you protected here? And the response is, really, did you really have to ask me that? And rather than telling me, they just blocked me. So I'm still waiting for an answer.
Yeah. So Yates is going on about how the kings and monarchs in Europe, the magistrates, whether it's because of the House of Lords and the Commons in Great Britain, because that's what he would be most familiar with, because they just left the British Empire. They use these standing armies, and today my question was: are we more safe, or do we have more liberty today because of the standing army? I would say no, because they are being used around the world in unconstitutional wars. So the Constitution is being ignored. We can say that the Constitution was written. We could argue the fact that perhaps the Constitution was written with the weaknesses in it that would allow them just to ignore it in the future on purpose. And I often think that Madison and Hamilton, that was their ultimate intention, was to get a national government. I said the N word on purpose because that's what we have.
That's what they wanted. That was the Virginia plan. Absolutely.
They absolutely wanted this. They were rebuffed at every chance. They didn't get what they wanted. And so the standing army, and we were talking about this last night with Daniel, with 3 years, just 3 years after the ratification of the Constitution, they were already ignoring it. George Washington raised an army of federal troops, sent them into Pennsylvania to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. So 3 years. It only took them 3 years to start ignoring the Constitution. And having a standing army, what did they do? They used it to suppress the people. So was Yates right? Do standing armies make us more free, give us more liberty? No. They will use them to take away our liberty.
And here's what you did. You just used how a standing army at the time was used to suppress liberty. Now, I've been told, well, George Washington was enforcing a federal statute, but the threshold inquiry was, well, was that statute constitutional in the first place? And that was a tax on the corn, which affected the distillers of whiskey, and taxes were supposed to be implemented uniformly among the states. So if a law is in violation of the Constitution, it was null and void, and in fact, no law at all. So then we fast forward to what you were also discussing about our imperialism and being the world's police and having a military around the world to keep not only others, us safe, but apparently everybody else, and according to George W., to spread democracy. But I would submit to you, we've gone back to this time of the Whiskey Rebellion, notwithstanding Posse Comitatus. We have our own standing armies in the form of the DEA, the DHS, and the Department of Agriculture, and the IRS, all of these ABC agencies, even the militarized police at our local agencies. So in our local communities. So we do have a military that is really not keeping us safe. They're more for the purpose of enforcing the law. So we're not free, and we're really not safe.
Yep. All right. I ran past my break time. I'm going to go take a break now. We'll come back and I'll continue on with Yates. This is the Paradigm Shift on the Renegade Rambler Radio Network, 18th Century Ideas for 21st Century Thinkers. When you wear Tail Gunner Apparel custom camo clothing and all natural bath and body products for women and men too. And don't forget to ask about their line of custom home products and bed scarves. Look awesome and feel even better. Tail Gunner Apparel on Facebook at Tail Gunner Apparel and at tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com. That's tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com.
Camouflage ain't nothing doesn't go with camouflage. You can't blend in the country. You can't stand out in the fashion world.
Renegade Ramblers Radio Network, 18th Century Ideas for 21st Century Thinkers.
Bury the bottle, mama. It's great
Well, welcome back to the Paradigm Shift. This is Jeff Johnson, and I am also joined by Suzanne Sherman. And we will be back at 10 o'clock with Suzanne's show immediately after this one. Well, not quite immediately after this one. I was just telling Suzanne during the break that I started this about 5 minutes early, so I'd had 5 minutes to get her show queued up and started right on time at 10 a.m. So we will continue on with our discussion now of Robert Yates and the Standing Army. I'm going to just go back to reset. I'll start this sentence completely over because I cut it off in the middle, and I'll continue reading from there. But they have always proved the destruction of liberty and are abhorrent to the spirit of a free republic. Do you think, I mean, seriously saying, is there any doubt what these framers, these founding fathers of our country felt about standing armies? I mean, this is just the first one. We haven't even got into Patrick Henry or George Mason or any of these other guys or any of these anti-federalists and their discussions. I mean, this is the very first one I've gotten to. I haven't even started the rest of them. And I mean, it's pretty common in their writings, their fear of standing armies.
Well, and also because, if you think about their geographic location, it was unlikely that there was going to be a need for a standing army because England was across the sea, Spain, all these countries in Europe were not going to be an imminent threat, but the more imminent threat was the Indian attacks, and that's why they wanted to preserve the local militias. So the local militias would come together and fight those battles. But as we see, to say, well, now the world is a different place, we need a standing army, but we really don't, because this was provided for in the Constitution. When we were attacked, we would have essentially a common defense and a free trade zone. Now, do we need to maintain a standing army because of times today? Yes, we have to ask ourselves, though, do we need bases all over the world? Do we need to be the world's police? Do we need to selectively decide what regimes are unacceptable and what regimes are acceptable, like the case of Saudi Arabia? So, when we have them as an ally, we really lose our moral authority and justification for the behavior of other places and why we attack them.
Yeah. So anyway, he continues on, and it's abhorrent to the spirit of a free republic. In England, where they depend upon the Parliament for their annual support, they have always been complained of as oppressive and unconstitutional. And he's talking about the standing army. And are seldom employed in executing the laws, never except on extraordinary occasions, and then under the direction of a civil magistrate. A free republic will never keep a standing army to execute its laws. It must depend upon the support of its citizens. But when a government is to receive its support from the aid of the citizens, it must be so constructed as to have the confidence, respect, and affection of the people. Men who, upon the call of the magistrate, offer themselves to execute the laws are influenced to do it either by the affection to the government or from fear, where a standing army will obey, but where this is not the case. The government must rest for its support upon the confidence and respect which the people have for their government and laws. So what he's saying is that without the standing army, the government has to depend on the people for the enforcement of the laws. And why would they do it? Because they have affection for their government. But like in England, where they have a standing army, the government can depend on the standing army by fear, because that's what he's talking about, the fear part. With the standing army, the people fear the government. Did the people in Pennsylvania fear the federal government after Washington sent 13 or 15,000 troops, whatever it was? I can't remember. I think it was around 15,000 troops into Pennsylvania to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. I would wager a guess that the people no longer had much affection for the government, and it was mostly fear that compelled obedience to their laws. And that's, again, right off the bat, we're talking obedience to the general government's laws. Does that sound like citizens, or does that sound like slaves?
What I don't
Seriously.
understand is why there wasn't immediate backlash to that. And I don't know if it was due to the personage and the reputation of George Washington, if he had this acceptance where it would allow him to get away with it and maybe not somebody else. But it seems to me that the Whiskey Rebellion and how it was handled was an example of precisely what those like Patrick Henry, John Taylor feared when they created this federal government and this national government pretending to be a federal government, because this is exactly what they were afraid of. And not only did we have an unconstitutional law with an unconstitutional tax, we had an unconstitutional handling of the matter and an attack on the citizens who were justifiably saying this is not a law, right along the lines of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. So why, and I ask myself this frequently, why was there not instant secession while we still had the might to make it happen? Why was there not a harsh rebuke in reaction to this event? It mystifies me.
And it does too, because they aren't very far removed from the war against Great Britain. I mean, it was just a short period of time. The treaty was under 30 years, under 10 years. The treaty was signed in, it was in the 1780s, so it wasn't even 20 years hence that they are now, so they would be fresh in their minds.
Yeah, and you would think that the states that were the most hesitant to join, Rhode Island, for instance, would say, you know what, you just proved that we were right. We're going. And why some of the biggest opponents would not just say we tried and we see the rat Patrick Henry smelled. We are out of here. And
Virginia, New York were one of the big holdouts.
Virginia, New York, and Rhode Island specifically reserved the right to leave. Virginia, New York, and Rhode Island reserved the right to secede should this government no longer suit them, right along the sentiments set forth in the Declaration. Now, those sentiments were still fresh in everybody's mind. Lincoln had forgotten about them, and today people don't know that they ever even existed. You hear this garbage where people say, well, they surrendered their sovereignty when they created the Constitution, which is an absolute abomination of historic fact, and historic fact that is easily ascertainable, but people choose not to look it up.
Right. So let's continue on with a little bit more here. Let's see here.
Oh, by the way, Jeff, I thought we were combining our shows today and just doing an hour.
Well, that was going to be at 10 a.m. I decided to do my paradigm shift today.
Okay.
So you can just save your shows, your prep for your show. I just decided I was going to do my show ahead of yours. I was up. It just seemed I might as well do it.
Okay, so
we're gonna get together and we'll do your show. You had some subjects we wanted to talk about during your show, and yes, we were going to combine our shows. Okay. But I decided this morning, oh, what the heck.
Perfect.
If I got to set everything up, I might as well just do a show.
Okay, then we'll do mine. All right, I'll be quiet and let you talk some more.
Oh, no. I want you to join in because, quite honestly, I'm terribly unprepared this morning. It's just been, you're right. It's hunting season. It's just not been a high priority right now getting on the radio, which I enjoy doing. And I wouldn't be doing it this morning if I didn't enjoy doing it, even unprepared as I am. Because I was just, while I was talking, you were talking just then, I was looking around, I was trying to find all my stories, and I have no idea where they are. So I'm going to have to start picking things up and just rather just go off on those, because I'm not sure where they all went. They're here somewhere, though. I'll find them. I'll find them during the next break, maybe. All right. So the body of the people being attached, the government will always be sufficient to support and execute its laws and to operate upon the fears of any faction which may be opposed to it, but not only to prevent an opposition to the execution of the laws themselves, but also to compel the most of them to aid the magistrate. But the people will not likely would not be likely to have such confidence in their rulers in a republic, so in a free republic, so extensive as the United States, as necessary for these purposes. The confidence which the people have in their rulers, the power they have of displacing them when they misbehave, but in a republic, to the extent of this continent, the people in general would be acquainted with very few of their rulers. Do you know personally your rulers, Suzanne? I don't. I know one state representative. I've met him. I know one state representative. That's it. I don't know my rulers, and that's what they have become, especially with the standing army that those founders were afraid of. We have become ruled. We aren't citizens. We aren't the ones in charge. We are now the people that are ruled. The people are acquainted would be acquainted with very few of the rulers. The people at large would know little of their proceedings, and it would be extremely difficult to change them. Do we know much of what they are doing to us in Washington? They're meeting every day. Do we know what they're doing? Here's a good example. What did Pelosi say when they were trying to pass Obamacare? We have to pass it so you can know what's in it. They did that entirely in secret. We didn't know what was going on. I mean, there was out there, but it was so massive, we had no way of knowing every little detail in there before they passed it. It was just put on us. I mean, today we have a lot better information today than they had in the 1700s, but they're still doing massive amount of things without our knowledge. We don't know what they're doing. We rarely know it even after they've done it. We have FISA courts. You have secret courts that the government goes to and gets warrants, and no one even has a right to know who they're going after. It's all done in secret. Is that what Patrick Henry and Washington and all these others that were founders, is that what they fought for? For a secret government? One that did things to the citizens of the states? I suspect that today, if we had a Patrick Henry, if Patrick Henry was somehow be reanimated and come back today, I suspect he would give a speech much like he did, where he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." I suspect that George Washington, in spite of his inclinations to use government as he did with the Whiskey Rebellion, I suspect that even this would be too much for him. And he would draw his sword and say, enough is enough. Well, let's take a break. It's 20 of. Well, it's not 20 of, but it's 20 of by my clock, streaming on Radio Co. And if you're listening, you can go to Radio Co and listen to these shows live. You go to our Facebook page, and right on there it says Use App. If you press that Use App, it'll take you right to Radio Co. You'll hit the play button on there, and you'll be listening live if we're playing live. So Radio Co's there. If you want to watch on Facebook Live, or on YouTube Live, we're there live on YouTube. We're also record these, and so they will play later in rebroadcasts. So we're going to go to break. This is the Paradigm Shift, only on the Renegade Ramblers Radio Network, 18th Century Ideas for 21st Century Thinkers.
From a jack to a king, from loneliness to a wedding ring, I played an ace and I won a queen, and walked away with your heart. From a jack to a king, with no regret I stacked the cards last night, and Lady Luck played her hand just right to make me king of your heart.
Prepare to attack. Prepare to attack on the count of 3. 1, 2, late. What happened? Where are they? I don't know, sir. They must have hyperjets on that thing. And what do we got on this thing? A Cuisinart? No, sir. We'll find them, catch them. Yes, sir. Prepare ship for light speed. No. Light speed is too slow. Light speed too slow? Yes, we're going to have to go right to ludicrous speed. Ludicrous speed? Sir, we've never gone that fast before. I don't know if the ship can take it. What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken? Prepare ship. Prepare ship for ludicrous speed. Fasten all seatbelts. Seal all entrances and exits. Close all shops in the mall. Cancel the free-range circus. Secure all animals in the zoo. Give me that, you petty excuse for an officer. Now hear this. Ludicrous speed. Sir, had you better buckle up? Buckle this. Ludicrous speed. Go! What the hell was that? Spaceball 1. They've gone to plaid.
Tired of this illegal and immoral national government running at ludicrous speed? We haven't gone plaid here at Renegade Ramblers Radio. 18th Century Ideas for 21st Century Thinkers.
It's my great pleasure to be with you. Good evening.
You're an economist working in the banking sector, yeah?
I am. Should I get a lawyer? I think I'm entitled to legal representation if we discuss my work.
This is just a few simple questions.
Simple questions? Yeah. How simple?
Well, they're theoretical.
Theoretical. I can deal, okay, we can deal with that. I mean, don't hold me to the answers, but...
Why not?
Well, because I'm an economist and I can think of a different set of circumstances under which my responses might vary somewhat.
Yeah, and everything's connected to everything else, isn't it?
In economics, I'm afraid that is the global fear right at the moment, yeah.
Now, right, there's a lot of uncertainty in world economics, isn't there?
There is a great deal of uncertainty and a lack of confidence.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk of quantitative easing.
Quantitative easing,
we hear all the time.
That's a term you hear a lot at the moment, yes.
Yeah, what exactly is quantitative easing?
Well, I can answer this because actually we're advising a couple of governments about this right at the moment.
And what are you saying to them?
Well, perhaps I should just take you through what we're telling them to do.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I won't go into a lot of detail.
No, that's
indiscreet, but this will give you an idea of how quantitative easing works.
Yep.
Take printer out of box and place on table with the out tray facing the window. That's right. Load paper into the paper receptacle and place currency on glass tray F.
Right.
Check alignment by printing out a test page.
Right.
Go into copy settings and select double-sided and the number of copies you require.
How many would you suggest?
In the case of one of our clients, it's 80 billion. 120 billion in the case of another client, and one client wants 1 trillion of these things.
Can you get printers to do that?
No, you can't. You're going to need a bank of them. I mean, it's a multi-printer job.
Ones,
big industrial strength. Yeah. Big like a Bofors gun, all facing the window.
Yeah.
Once you've ascertained that you have the alignment correct, you alert the banking sector, open the window, and press copy.
And stand well back.
Yes, you've got to stand well back because they can create a bit of a vacuum while reaching cruising height.
Whereabouts?
In the super fund industry very often.
And you'd have to consider the wind direction too.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to be doing this upwind.
No, because you'd get covered in pretend money, couldn't you?
Covered in what?
Pretend money.
No, this is not pretend money. This is real currency we're creating.
But aren't you just printing it off? I mean, these are photocopies, aren't they?
Excuse me. Dave, This is not going to work. Because I've just explained it to a bloke and he saw through it straight away. Are you in banking?
No.
No, he's not even in the banking racket. Okay, I'll try that.
Try what?
Have you ever heard of Rumpelstiltskin?
No.
Good. Now we're getting somewhere. Pull up a chair. I'll tell you a tale.
Well, welcome back to the Paradigm Shift. This is Jeff Johnson, your host, and I'm joined today by Suzanne Sherman, and we will take a quick break in about 5 minutes. I'll reset, become producer, and produce Suzanne's show, and I'm going to be joining in, I'm sure, at times in her show. We both are. It's hunting season, and Suzanne is away. She's visiting family in California, so she is rightfully not really as prepared for a show this morning. I mean, probably more so than I am. I have really less excuse other than just hunting season, and oh well. But we're here. We're having fun doing it. We do enjoy doing this. Suzanne, I don't know. Were you going to get into this on your show today? This man Furious, the city council Furious. We intended to talk about this a while back. If you are planning on getting into this today, we can discuss it here now.
Absolutely, we can talk about that now.
Okay.
Do you have that clip?
Oh, you know what? No, I don't.
That's okay.
We'll put that off to another time. I'll get the clip. I will get the clip, and we'll do it another time. Maybe we'll do it next week.
I think the story has better impact if we use that soundbite of that town councilwoman.
Yep, we will. All right, let's see here.
Next.
I think we've talked about standing armies enough for now.
Sure.
And again, people, don't take my word for these things. Google them. Google this. Look up Brutus 1, Anti-Federalist Brutus 1, and you'll find this. Read it for yourselves. See if I'm just making this stuff up. I'm not. I mean, this is there. If you look up Anti-Federalist, you will find all kinds of different writers. There was just so many of them.
You know, another example.
Look it up and find them. Go ahead.
Another example as well with St. Washington was he signed the carriage tax. Now, that was a tax that didn't impact the states directly. It wasn't a uniform tax based on apportionment of the population. That was a tax that hit certain individuals only in direct contravention, again, to the founding documents. And you could recall John Taylor's arguments against that. I actually have that booklet back home, and I think I'm going to address that in the next week or two. And that tax was upheld.
Right. And quite honestly, today, they may go to the states proportionally, but even our federal income tax today isn't equally applied. Some people are more equal than others.
Progressive tax.
Yeah. Some people are more equal than others.
Some people don't pay at all.
That's right. And some people pay a lot. And some of the people that have the ability to pay a lot don't pay anything at all anyway, because they have the wherewithal to hire the right people to find all the ways in that they can get the government to put in there for them to get out of paying. So, again, I've been holding on to this story for a bit. I've not gotten into it much. I've talked about it. Yates talked about an aristocracy earlier. We discussed that a few weeks ago when I started into Brutus, that we'd end up with aristocracy. And quite honestly, if I say this name, it will not take long for you to realize that, yes, we do have an aristocracy because, and this isn't even who you think it is, Bush political director offers Alamo board position for a price. So immediately you think I'm talking about either George I or George II. Well, No. This is George P. Bush, a young guy. Look, there he is. So, do we have an aristocracy? We most certainly do. So, anyway, just some background. The Alamo now, they're trying to rebrand it. In other words, they're trying to rewrite history. They're trying to make it politically correct. So that's what's going on here. And there's a lot of Texans that are very upset because that's a shrine to many Texans. I mean, the battle cry was "Remember the Alamo," and to this day, there are many Texans that are not happy what's going on down there. A planned ramp up for a controversial re-imaging Alamo. The fundraising machinery is controlled by 10 boardroom insiders who are expected to bring cash to the table. Ray Myers, a retired high school principal with a lifelong love of the Alamo, figured he could bring a grassroots sensibility to the Texas General Land Office's $400 million vision for the San Antonio Shrine. $400 million. Suzanne, have you ever been to the Alamo?
No, it's one of the places I would love to see.
I have been there, and it is very interesting. Quite honestly, I fail to see why they need $400 million to do anything there. I mean, it is a beautiful shrine. It is a beautiful site, and it is. He is correct. I believe. Yeah, at the end of the sentence, San Antonio Shrine, and that's basically that's why I said earlier, because there's many Texans that view this as a shrine. It is something close to holy in their history.
And what are they proposing to do there? Why do they need 400 million?
Because they're going to re-image the Alamo. Yeah, they're going to rewrite history. They're going to do what they've done to our collective history as the Union of States. They're not going to do this.
Structural, nothing having to do with the facilities themselves. We're just going to hire a bunch of leftists and pay them a lot of money to rewrite history.
Right. It's to re-image the Alamo.
Yeah.
They're going to make it politically correct, and they're going to, the whole thing. So, so this is Ray Meyer speaking, quote, "I personally spoke to GLO Commissioner George P. Bush." That's, again, part of our aristocracy. He is one of the Bush aristocracy, Bush royalty. In April, I expressed my concern about the reimagine, quote unquote. That's what they're calling this. They're calling it reimagining the Alamo. Reimagine. It's history. It's a set fact. You don't have to reimagine it. There is a definite set history. Something happened. There was a battle there. People died. Nothing more, nothing less. Got to reimagine it, though.
Well, we have to rewrite it to show that the Americans clearly stole this land from Mexico. When I was actually starting to learn about history, my kids were going to be in school now a few hours a day. I got a lot of DVDs on Netflix and just thought that if something was presented by the History Channel or these organizations, National Geographic, that you could trust what you were seeing. And I learned by watching these that they were very, very biased. There was one about the Alamo, and they had people like noted historian George Lopez commenting and saying essentially that the war was unconstitutional. Lincoln agreed it was unconstitutional. Noted, again, expert on the Constitution, President Lincoln. And I noticed the whole thing was very much biased against the United States point of view. I'm the first one to always, to criticize our government when we're wrong. But it's very obvious also when something's being presented to put forth only one side of the story.
Right. So anyway, they're going to reimagine the Alamo. Myers, let's see here. I expressed my concerns about the reimagined plan and specifically asked why there weren't any grassroots Texans on his planning committee. I'm starting the music. It's a long clip today, so I have it, because we're running out of time. I'm almost out, so I need to read a couple sentences here. He responded that there should be additional Texans on the committee and promised to get back to me the following day. Let's go down here. Bush, political director, who offered the Forney resident a board position for $250,000. So he could buy his way onto this reimagined thing if he just forked out money to get on their board. What went wrong, folks? Even Texas. What went wrong in Texas? That now you have to buy your way onto boards for public sites. That's
well, look at big campaign donors getting, appointments, political appointments. So,
yeah, well, that's why we have the motto here: 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers. It's time to start really looking at these 18th century principles and applying them to the 21st century, because they are timeless. Unlike some people on Facebook that think that this is the 21st century, it's completely different. It doesn't apply today. Well, they do. Natural rights don't change. These deep thoughts that these really deep political thinkers had didn't change. Well, the music just got louder on its own, so we had a fade on this. That means we really are getting close to being out of time. We have about a minute and a half left. Thank you all for joining this morning. And I know most of you are going to listen on podcast. That's great. We're glad you're listening. I'll go and look on Facebook and use the app when we're live. You can listen on Radio Co. Listen on YouTube Live. And at 10 o'clock a.m., we'll be back live with Suzanne. Go ahead, Suzanne. Close us out. We've got about a minute.
Yeah, if you go to the app, you can just hit the Radio Co. and it streams. I think it's 24/7. I've tried it all times of the night, so you can hear it. We have live radio in the morning, so join us on the app and then hang out. Jeff and I are going to continue to stumble through another hour of live radio today.
Yep. So, we have there's about a minute left of the music. We have a minute left in the show. And we'll be back in 5 minutes at 10 a.m. Eastern with the Wasatch Report with Suzanne Sherman. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.